right, hello from 50 feet underground in the North Dakota soil. My name is Rob. I'm the site supervisor of the Ronald Reagan Minuteman Missile State Historic Site up here north of Cooperstown, North Dakota. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite subjects, missile silos, and kind of the history of what they represented in the American nuclear deterrent since 1960, all the way to 2024 with the Sentinel program. I like to call it Silo-ology. So I'm coming to you from a launch control center, part of the former 321st Strategic Missile Wing up here in the Grand Forks area. And when folks call to see about tours, one thing they ask is that, can we go underground and see the missile silo? Unfortunately, that's technically not true. You can come down and see the control center, and this place was in charge of 10 missiles, of flight of Minuteman missile silos, anywhere from 3 to 18 miles away. So we do have a missile silo. It's our November 33 site about 2 miles east of Cooperstown, but it is filled full of gravel today. We can't dig it out because the Air Force would be a little disappointed because we signed certain forms saying that we're going to leave that just as it is. What it looks like basically an operational state, it is certainly no longer operational, but we leave it as it was basically looking like in the 1980s and 1990s with a closed door that weighs 107.5 tons. So even if I wanted to dig it out, it's going to be a little hard to open that door. So missile silos have certainly progressed over time. These were considered small compared to the earlier ones, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So a missile silo is a hardened underground structure that is generally protecting an intercontinental ballistic missile. There were some silos protecting intermediate range ballistic missiles in Europe. The French had some, as did the Soviets. All those are now out of service. So when you talk about a missile silo, you're generally talking about ICBMs. This seems to be like the default photo when they talk about missile silos. They automatically go to that Titan II because it looks really impressive down there. The interesting thing is that represented 54 intercontinental ballistic missiles deployed by the United States across Arkansas, Kansas, and Arizona, whereas you had 1,000 Minuteman silos across the northern Great Plains in Missouri at one point. There's still about 400 left in service. So if you want to visit a missile silo, the only one that you can actually go underground in as of 2024, as we know for regular public tours, is that Titan Missile Museum down there in Arizona. Certainly a nice visit in February if you're from North Dakota. So South Dakota, our vaunted rivals down there at Minuteman Missile National Historic Site, I'm kidding. Great folks, great visitor center down there if you get a chance to visit. They have a Delta IX launch facility that kind of looks like November 33, but they have a viewing enclosure and you can look down into that silo. So if you look at this gentleman here looking up at this Minuteman III missile, you'll notice there's not a lot of room, not a lot of places to stand in there, and that's why they don't have tours of Minuteman silos. Of course, they still have 400 Minuteman silos still in service with the U.S. Air Force. They're not apt to offer tours. These are active nuclear missile sites, so they're a little defensive of them, understandably. So if you get a chance, sometimes they have open houses at the bases, and you can see a trainer LF, trainer launch facility they have to train the crews, the maintainers, on base that they'll open up to the public for tours every so often. So to see missile silos for regular public tours, you're looking at that Titan Missile Museum, Minuteman Missile National Historic Site, and then us to see the top side of November 33. Quebec 1 down in Wyoming has the launch control facility. They do not have a silo. So why do you have missile silos in the first place? You know, just taking you back, let's look back at 1955. I know smartphones, computers are the size of buildings, and cars look pretty cool, I guess. 10 years before that, you had the end of World War II, what Churchill called the Wizard War. You had a rapid advance in technology. You're looking at, if you go back to the 1930s, you look at comic books and they're talking about like Buck Rogers or like rockets and stuff like that. And it's a future thing that, it's way off into the future. We're not going to talk about that for a while. But in World War II, you had the Germans developing the V-2 rocket. The United States, of course, develops the atomic bomb. And if you think about the hours-long mission by this lumbering B-29 bomber, propeller-driven, to strike Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and August 9th, 1945, respectively, that is like ancient history by the time of 1955 because you have jet-propelled bombers, you're looking at supersonic bombers, you have the hydrogen bomb, you have this weapon that is just an order of magnitude larger than atomic bombs, But then you have the development of intercontinental ballistic missiles. So, this space age type look, you're looking at putting people into space by the late 1950s. Just a rapid advancement of technology going on between 1945 and 1960. So with an ICBM, as opposed to flying hours by even a jet bomber to like Soviet targets, you have a 30-minute flight time. Once that thing is launched, it takes 30 minutes to get halfway around the world. These are the first hypersonic weapons, 15 to 16,000 mile per hour top speed. Eventually, they became very responsive to attack, and they were known as prestige weapons. But ultimately, ICBMs needed to be protected. Bomber bases, they were realizing in the mid-1950s these are super vulnerable to a Soviet attack. And by 1957, the Soviets put up Sputnik in October. First satellite, they realized, hey, that can also launch nuclear warheads against North American continent. And we have no idea these missiles are even coming because we have no early warning systems. We're going to find out when we start losing cities. So they realized, too, that eventually Soviet technology was going to get more accurate with their missiles, so we needed to protect ours as well. And they did as well, I should point that out. So eventually, by 1959, September 1959, we have an operational capability, briefly, at Vandenberg Air Force Base, California, the Atlas D on these gantry launchers. And if you notice, they're really exposed to the elements and exposed to nuclear attack. So very quickly they're saying, let's find a way to protect Atlas, and we'll start putting Titans in missile silos. So one thing to consider too is not only protecting missile silos, protecting the missiles themselves, but there's a political element as well. They're realizing in the early 1960s that if I have a hardened missile silo, that means I can provide a second strike. Both the United States and the Soviet Union had a kind of a bad history with surprise attacks. The United States with December 7th, 1941, of course, Pearl Harbor. But the Soviets, too, with June 22nd, 1941, with Operation Barbarossa, the German invasion of Russia. So both sides are like really weary about surprise attack. There's a worry now of crisis stability. If things are really getting tense, if I have a false alarm, should I use my missiles or lose them because they're exposed on launchers? And if I have them in a silo, that guarantees that if there's a first strike, at least in the early days, I could write out that first strike and respond with a second strike of my own, promoting what's known as assured destruction and later called mutually assured destruction. That it would be national suicide to try and attack me with nuclear weapons because I could retaliate. So that delicate balance of terror to some extent during the Cold War. So that's one other reason they're developing missile silos. So Atlas, you're going through a very interesting evolution of protection for these sites. So like those Vandenberg gantry sites, they're evolving to what are known as Coffin Launchers, offering 5 pounds per square inch overpressure protection, which, like a wooden house effectively gets knocked down at 5 psi, so it's not a lot of protection, it's something at least. The trouble with Atlas D is that it is very hard to maintain on alert because it's the first of its kind. They're learning a lot during the process with developing the Atlas missile. You're looking at essentially what is a balloon of a missile because the skin is no thicker than a dime in some places. 2 bladders, one is filled full of RP1, kind of a version of kerosene, and the other one is filled with liquid oxygen. Very difficult and dangerous to work with. So the fueling process with these missiles was very time-consuming, very dangerous. A few of them did explode on their stands, especially when you look at the Atlas F program. But essentially, the Atlas is something that we were able to put on alert in an early way to counter the Soviets in those early days of a worried supposed missile gap, and then during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So Atlas D also suffered from the problem of command guidance. It relied on a ground computer to guide it towards its target, radio command. If you lost that ground station, if it was jammed, that missile became inaccurate, and you're having troubles. Not as an effective deterrent. So you go to all inertial guidance. The missiles know where to go based on their own systems on the missile. It's pretty accurate. They get better over time. But Atlas E and Atlas F, all inertial, you're looking at 25 pound per square inch in these buried, semi-buried coffin launchers, as they call them. Excuse me. They deploy a few of those. F.E. Warren, Wyoming gets some more missile sites, Forbes in Kansas, and then Fairchild out at Washington. Whereas Atlas F is a little more dispersed. These are the largest missile silos ever built by the United States, and they had a lot of troubles building these because there again, it was brand new. What became very expensive sites. I mean, this is 174 foot deep, 52 feet wide. If you ever get a chance to look down into an Atlas F, that is like the ultimate hole in the ground. It is deep. I mean, a lot of those sites, they've been scrapped of all their metal, so they're really just fascinating structures. And a few of them have been converted into homes. I know of at least one being turned into a doomsday bunker. But with Atlas F, you have something that's fielded during the Cuban Missile Crisis that can protect the missile from 100 pound per square inch overpressure of a nearby nuclear burst. Raise it to the surface via elevator, you launch it, and you had a fairly capable weapon system, but it still suffered some alert rate problems because it was the Atlas. It was hard to maintain on alert. But it was used in the Mercury program, the Atlas system, not the missiles. Some of the missiles are actually later used in the space program for kind of expendable launchers into the 1960s and 70s. So these sites are all closed down by 65. Atlas D is out of service by 64. And when you hear of missile silo homes, a lot of them are those Atlas Fs because they had 72 of those places all across the Great Plains states and even up in upstate New York, Plattsburgh Air Force Base area. So with the Titan system, it was developed as a backup to Atlas. It had more of a rigid airframe, so they didn't have to worry about what was known as keeping it in stretch, keeping it pressurized so it wouldn't collapse in on itself. And it was a two-stage missile that gave a lot of promise for the future. So Titan 1 unfortunately relied on the command guidance like Atlas D, so there were some problems there. And like Atlas F, you had to raise it to the surface for firing via a big elevator. So those sites are out of service by 65. 54 of those, Washington, Idaho, I believe 2 squadrons out there at Lowry in Colorado. Ellsworth Air Force Base, South Dakota had some, and then Beale Air Force Base in California. So with the Titan II program, you have 54 of these as well, but you're looking at a second generation liquid-fueled missile because these are storable liquid propellants. The missile was very responsive to launch. The trouble is when you're recycling the propellants, you had to be very careful with them because they are very explosive, of course, but very hazardous to health. When they're handling the fuel of these systems, they're wearing what are known as REFCOs. I can't think of what the acronym stands for right now. Basically, it's a spacesuit to make sure you're not breathing in any of the vapors or getting that stuff on your skin. Nasty stuff to work with. But it's a very potent missile system, a very large warhead, 9 megatons. So they keep these in service for some time. I mean, they're coming into service after the Cuban Missile Crisis, and they're only leaving service in 1987 as the Peacekeeper missile is coming into service. So these sites are just fascinating. There again, if you get a chance to visit down in Arizona, complete structure, complete launch complex is there. Other places they're making doomsday bunkers, well, I shouldn't say doomsday bunkers, but like homes out of these or Airbnb, little complexes where you can stay the night, I guess. The silos are gone. That was a part of the regulations in the 80s when they were demolishing them. But I understand the entry areas are open, and then you can get into the launch control centers. People have been digging those out when they acquire the properties. Titan 1 sites are just amazing complexes. I mean, there's 3 silos connected by underground tunnels. The largest, at least, complexes built by the United States as far as ICBMs go. I understand at least one of them was being used for scuba diving training, I believe, up in Washington. But from my knowledge, none of these are open to the public for tours. There again, Titan 2 down in Arizona. Excellent tour. Get to my favorite missile here, the Minuteman. So, there's a lot to talk about with Minuteman. The first complexes come on alert. Just one complex, I should say, the Alpha, up at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana, during the Cuban Missile Crisis. These early sites have 300 PSI protection, so they're pretty well protected, like the Titan IIs. The silos are much smaller. Everything's a lot more automated. Whereas the earlier sites had staff members basically keeping an eye on the missile, Minuteman was meant to be out there for weeks or even months at a time without worry of people coming out to check on it. Just a very redundant, automated system, ready to respond at a moment's notice. So the earlier sites, they had what were known as soft support buildings. They weren't expected to ride out a nuclear attack for a long period of time because if you lost commercial power, bad, but then you might lose your generator power. They were able to launch on batteries for several hours, but it wasn't until the Minuteman II program where they really buried these launcher equipment buildings and put their power generation at a little more protected basis. And these very much represent two presidential administrations. Minuteman I was built very much with the massive retaliation capabilities in mind of the Eisenhower years, with some modifications as they came into service, especially at Minot Air Force Base, Whiteman Air Force Base, and F.E. Warren. They protected the support structures a little bit better with those sites. But Minuteman II is very much this Kennedy idea of flexible response, that you're giving the president more options to fight a nuclear war instead of trying to potentially launch on warning. These were built for a protracted period of nuclear crisis to be able to launch weeks later, even if you've lost power for several weeks. And then a lot of redundancy in the communications capability with Minuteman II. So when I say Minuteman I and Minuteman II, I'm talking about the structures, not necessarily the missiles themselves. Many Minuteman I sites, so like Ellsworth and then Whiteman and then Malmstrom, upgraded to the Minuteman II. Grand Forks started out with the Minuteman II, but by 72 they actually went to the Minuteman III, as did the 564th Strategic Missile Squadron up at Malmstrom Air Force Base, kind of a separate unit, a part of the 4 squadrons up there at Malmstrom. This was one of 4. And then Minot and F.E. Warren went to the Minuteman III program. So the structures have been greatly upgraded over the years, and they're still in service. I mean, Minuteman II is out. We're the last one of this Sylvania configuration. These were known as the Boeing capsules, and greatly upgraded over the years. Very resilient, ground-based nuclear deterrent that has been regularly upgraded over the years. But we are getting 50 years down the line with the Minuteman III program, and so that's why they're looking at Sentinel today. So there was a question I heard the other day. It's like, why didn't we keep Peacekeeper? It was such a newer missile. Well, there were fewer of these deployed, about 50 in the F.E. Warren field from about 1987 to 2005, although we are reusing the warheads, the reentry vehicles. They're aboard some Minuteman IIIs with the W-87 warhead. But the interesting thing about MX, they start out calling it MX and eventually becomes Peacekeeper, is that they're learning in the 1970s we're entering what's known as a so-called window of vulnerability. The Russians have caught up with us, Soviets, excuse me, with accuracy and their intercontinental ballistic missiles. That meant our Minuteman silos were at risk. We're at risk of losing a major part of our nuclear deterrent to a first strike. So what that means is that new missiles, well, we're probably not going to put them in silos, but we're going to put them on trains, or we're going to put them on the back of a truck, or we're going to put them in a shell game configuration out there in like Nevada or Utah, moving them around to complicate Soviet targeting, putting them on the south side of mountains, so like a Russian missile coming in over the North Pole is less likely to hit it. A lot of different configurations they considered for MX. Some of my favorite were the coastal submarines and then the Great Lakes barges, just a lot of different ways, even air mobile. But eventually, MX, it's not a controversial program. It just takes time to kind of mature. And by 1980s, they're like, we're just going to put them in Minuteman silos, and it kind of defeats the process, to be honest, of why MX was developed in the first place. Highly accurate reentry vehicles. Cold launch from silos because these missiles were a little bit too big. You couldn't fire them from the silos, so they had to be ejected and then launched. There again, another fascinating program in American ICBM history. So today we still have those 400 Minuteman IIIs. Do not visit those sites. The Air Force is very protective there, again, of their nuclear missile installations. Same goes with their convoys, if you ever see them around the active bases. But you're looking at the Sentinel system. They're developing that today to replace Minuteman III in service. And it looks like we're looking at the 2030s for that program. So Minuteman III has served the United States well for a long time, but it looks like it's going to be replaced pretty soon. So besides visiting the other sites, this was me on a tour back in 2022 with a sign trying to get visitors to visit North Dakota as opposed to Arizona or South Dakota or Wyoming. I don't know how successful I was, but I tried. Just to show you the different places you can go in the United States to visit these terrific ICBM histories. Of course, Titan Missile Museum, just a great tour. Minuteman Missile, they are very busy. You want to call ahead to make sure you can get on a tour, but they have a great visitor center, and it's just, they're, again, amazing staff. It's a great tour. Quebec 1 opened up not too long ago, and that is a former Peacekeeper facility that was originally a Minuteman facility, but they're doing an awesome job of interpretation down there. And then, of course, there's us up here in North Dakota, the Ronald Reagan Minuteman Missile State Historic Site in North Dakota, also known as Oscar Zero, on November 33. So we're certainly open for tours, and we welcome you to come up. So in American history, the missile silo has really represented a lot of different things. If you look at some of the cultural history behind it, some of the early films that represent missile silos are these great elements of an advanced nuclear deterrent. These missiles are here to respond to like potential Soviet aggression and to maintain the peace in the world. Effectively, if you come on tour here, that's probably pretty much what we're going to tell you, is that these were weapons of nuclear deterrence. They were not intended to be launched. So another view of ICBMs and missile silos are of these doomsday scenarios of pressing the big red button, turning those launch keys, launching these missiles. You look at like movies like in The Day After. Normal day, people in Kansas City, Missouri just glance eastward, and all of a sudden they start seeing these contrails out of the Whiteman Air Force Base field start moving northward. Just these quiet contrails heading towards the Soviet Union. And somebody realizes Soviet missiles take about 30 minutes to strike targets here. And let's just say, no spoilers, but things don't go very well thereafter, during the day after. These are weapons that are destructive beyond a lot of what we can even conceive of as human beings. They talk about the Cold War being the long peace. There has not been a major conflict between world powers since 1945, and nuclear weapons are sometimes credited with that. But on the same time, you have assured destruction capability. You have this nuclear fear of, if deterrence fails, things aren't looking bright for people. We just basically call it a bad day down here. You're looking at suffering and devastation not witnessed in human history. Of course, we want to have folks have a nice time here on tour. We want them to take away some of the history and inspiration to learn more about North Dakota and the Cold War. But on the other hand, you try to sometimes get across, and you don't, let's just say do it all the time, that these things represented potential deaths of millions of people. And the same goes for the Soviet ICBMs and the Chinese ICBMs. So, and British SLBMs. The Cold War was a very dangerous time in our history as humanity. And there's a lot to take away from that if, we're going to keep going as a species, I suppose. So, with that jolly note, we want you to come out to visit Oscar Zero, of course, to form your own opinions, but, take away a little bit of history about the Cold War. So, with that, we're going to end it there. My name is Rob at the Ronald Reagan Minuteman Missile State Historic Site. We hope to catch you on tour. We'll talk to you next time.